The siege lasted 7 months, 40,000 people trapped in a stone wall, all around them, enemies, hunger, disease, and one problem they don't write about in textbooks: 5 tons. 5 tons of waste every day, thousands of gallons of urine, mountains of feces growing by the hour. Where to put it all when you can't leave the walls, how to avoid drowning in your own filth, and most importantly, how to avoid dying from it before you die from the enemy's sword. The answer will make you thank modern plumbing. The Romans were geniuses of siege warfare, but their greatest invention wasn't the ballista or the battering ram. It was a system that worked where historians hadn't looked. A deep, stinking, deadly system of survival, when the only enemy was yourself. Today you'll learn how a Roman soldier relieved himself when a siege dragged on for months. First, some numbers. The siege of Jerusalem, 70 CE, 3 legions. Let's do the math. One soldier produces about half a kilogram of waste per day. Multiply by 15,000, 7.5 tons per day, 225 tons per month. And the siege lasted 5 months, 1,125 tons of shit. Almost. Where was it all? Not in the city, where the besieged died of hunger and disease, but in the Roman camp. 40,000 people, thousands of horses and mules, and no sewer system. The Romans came up with 3 ways. The first is a ditch. Yes, the very ditch they dug around the camp for protection. It was not only a defense, but also a gigantic cesspool. The soldiers relieved themselves right in the ditch, at night, under cover of darkness, standing on the edge, afraid of falling in. But the ditch quickly filled up, and then they buried it, and dug a new one, 3 meters from the old one. All year round, the legions advanced, leaving behind fields of buried ditches. Archaeologists are still finding them. The second method, amphorae. Yes, those same clay jars for wine and oil. Empty amphorae became, well, you get the idea. They were placed at the end of each row of tents. Each soldier knew his own amphora. Every morning, slaves carried them behind the camp and buried the contents. 300 amphorae a day, 9,000 a month. But the most interesting is the third method, a military ruse. Sometimes the siege dragged on so long that the Romans began to fall ill, not from wounds, but from the unsanitary conditions. Dysentery mowed down the legions faster than arrows. And then they did the unexpected. They launched an offensive, with mud. Literally, the soldiers collected all the waste from the day. They loaded it into leather sacks and hurled it over the walls with ballistas, ancient biological weapons. Imagine the besieged facing a rain of something I don't even want to name. Diseases spread instantly. Morale plummeted. Often, the city surrendered precisely after such bombardments. And now, the human factor. Imagine yourself in the soldier's place. You haven't slept for 3 days. You're hungry. The smell all around you is nauseating. You walk to the edge of the ditch, but there's no room left. You go to the amphora. It's overflowing. You try to find a secluded corner, but in a camp of 40,000 men, there are no secluded corners. And then you go behind the palisade, behind the stockade, right into the enemy's arrows, because it's better to risk being killed than to drown in your own filth. And sometimes the enemy fired. They knew where the soldiers went to relieve themselves. They waited, and they killed. The stakes: if you leave waste in the camp, an epidemic will start. Dysentery kills in a week. You lose soldiers faster than in battle. If you carry it outside, the enemy can kill you. If you bury it too close, it will poison the wells. Would the Romans find a solution? Yes, and it was brutal. They forced slaves and local peasants to do the dirtiest work. Those who couldn't defend themselves. Slaves carried amphorae. Slaves buried the contents. Slaves died of disease instead of soldiers. The Roman army survived because it always had those who were worse off. Compare this with any other ancient army. The Greeks had no system. They shit wherever they wanted. Their camps became breeding grounds for the plague. The Egyptians had slaves, but no discipline. The barbarians had no hygiene. Only the Romans turned necessity into logistics, into calculation, into a weapon. They knew that war is won not only by the sword, but also by how you manage what comes out of you every day. So, the answer to the riddle: how did the Romans relieve themselves during a siege? With a system: ditches, amphorae, slaves, and sometimes ballistae armed with biological weapons. They turned waste into a tactical advantage, and they survived where others died in their own filth. 5 tons of shit a day, thousands of gallons of urine, and Rome still won, because discipline begins where shame ends. And now the question I promised you: You walk out of the toilet and flush. You have no idea where it all goes. Now imagine this: a ditch, an amphora, and enemy arrows. How would you cope? Tell us in the comments. How many days would you have lasted in a besieged camp before the unsanitary conditions killed you? Subscribe, because in the next video I'll tell you how the Romans washed themselves under siege, when water was more valuable than gold. Spoiler alert, they used urine. Yes, their own. And it still works. Don't miss it.